The Substance is being called the sickest movie of the last 10 years. It had people fainting and walking out of screenings. It is one of the most divisive movies of the year, so let's get into it. In this video, I'll break it all down, explain the ending, the profound meaning of the movie, and answer big questions like what is the substance really? What is the meaning of the orange hallway, the white-toweled bathroom? Why are the characters called Elisabeth and Sue? And what is a feminist body horror anyway? I'm MadMorph, and this is The Substance Explained.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself?
I'm Sue. Let's go.
If you're new here, welcome. This is my movie club where I talk about movies and TV shows, so go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button for more like this. The movie opens with unknown gloved hands using the substance on an egg. It immediately begins splitting into two. This will make much more sense later. Elisabeth Sparkle getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. We haven't met the character yet, we're just literally seeing her star as time passes, from crowds huddling and taking pictures of it, to it slowly cracking and becoming weathered. This was such a clever way of showing the waning of her star power, the passage of time. It continues to degrade and people care less and less about it, and therefore her, until we reach present day. Now we meet Elisabeth Sparkle, who has been reduced over time to doing a workout show on television. She seems happy in her job, and she walks down a hallway and the pictures behind her show her through the years, another passage of time. She's been doing this for a while. Every time she passes someone in the hall, they wish her a happy birthday. She happily thanks them and continues down the hall. This is an absolute sledgehammer of symbolism that she is getting older. The women's restroom is out of order, so she goes into the men's, and this is when her life changes. She overhears her boss Harvey, no doubt a reference perhaps to the despicable Harvey Weinstein, as he comes in and is on the phone. Elisabeth is in the stall. He doesn't know that she's there as he says, "We need her young, we need her hot, and we need her now." He's ranting about Elisabeth, laughing about her being an Oscar winner back in the 30s. What was it even for? King Kong? He walks out, remarking to his friend that women's fertility starts to decrease at the age of 25 and that his friend better get busy. Harvey is a walking pile of misogyny. Elisabeth exits the stall, sad. She looks up to the mirror, and for the first time there is a look on her face that looks like she now views herself differently. Looking at oneself in this mirror is clearly a theme throughout this movie for obvious reasons. We cut to Harvey and Elisabeth in a restaurant, and this is a scene that everyone is talking about as Dennis Quaid stuffs his face with shrimp in one of the most disgusting eating scenes in a movie ever. It's like the worst mukbang you can imagine. This pig of a character is just stuffing his face whilst he explains to her that she's being let go from the network, and then he leaves. Then Elisabeth watches a fly drowning in a glass of whiskey. Not entirely sure of the symbolism of this one, and it might actually be a reference to David Cronenberg's The Fly, which has definitely had an influence and an impact on this movie. Then, as Elisabeth is driving home, she sees them ripping down a billboard with her face on. Everything about this fast-paced opening is telling you one thing over and over again. It is over for Elisabeth. She's too old and is no longer wanted. And then, while she's distracted, she's hit by another car. She's in hospital, being given the all clear, and the doctor wishes her a happy birthday, but this time she starts to cry. In this 5 minutes of opening scenes alone, we've seen the way that she views her birthday, her getting older, and herself shift dramatically and entirely in the space of just a few days. When the doctor leaves, a young attractive man with a birthmark on his hand says there's one more check to do. He examines her spine, saying that she's a good candidate, and he hands her her coat. In the pocket of the coat, she finds a USB stick wrapped in a note that says, "It changed my life." The USB stick says, "The Substance," and there is a phone number. But before we find out what it is, she's interrupted by Fred, a nice-looking man who says he went to school with her. He says, "You haven't changed a bit. You're still the most beautiful girl in the whole wide world." He asks her to go out for a drink sometime, and she takes his number. Elisabeth goes home, and we finally find out what's on the USB stick. A video plays.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself?
It asks, have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself? Younger, more beautiful, more perfect. It tells her that a single injection will unlock her DNA, creating a cellular division to release a new version of yourself. Elisabeth is the Matrix, and she'll have to share time with this new version. 1 week on, 1 week off. Every 7 days, they have to swap. And it finishes by saying that the one and only thing to not forget is that you are one. You cannot escape from yourself. Elisabeth throws the USB stick into the trash and leaves. It doesn't take long for her to reconsider though. We cut to her getting drunk in a bar and watching a young couple, a reminder perhaps of her loneliness and what she's missing out on, to be adored. She goes home and immediately fishes the USB out of the trash and calls the number. She collects the substance from a shady back alley, what looks like an Amazon drop-off locker inside of a sort of hidden building. The pack comes with an activator, food pouches and stabilizers, and it's a bright toxic green. Everything about this says that it is a terrible idea and that there will only be bad consequences to come from it. The rules have been set for them, for Elisabeth, and for us, and you know what comes next will be the breaking of them and what that means. The entire thing speaks to the pressured desperation that she feels to take this substance. She stands in front of the mirror in a fully unclothed scene and examines her body before taking the substance. We then get one of the most insane transformation scenes that you'll have seen in a very, very long time. An unclothed Demi writhes on the floor of a clinically white-tiled bathroom. Her spine and back pulsate. We see as her eyeball splits, just like the egg at the start of the movie. Two eyeballs fight for space in a single eye socket before finally out of her back, like she's being unzipped of her skin, a younger version of herself is birthed. Played by Margaret Qualley, this new character sort of emerges and examines herself in the mirror unclothed also. And so begins this new dual life. The new version of Elisabeth calls herself Sue. She attends an audition for Elisabeth's old job. They love her, Harvey loves her, everybody loves her, and she gets the job. We have a montage of the next 7 days. Sue is just young, hot, and loved by everyone. She returns to Elisabeth's body and they switch. Now Sue will lay dormant on the floor, feeding from the bags, while Elisabeth lives her 7 days of allotted time. Elisabeth fries 2 eggs in a pan. This is symbolic of the split egg that is her and Sue, and a callback to the start of the movie. We don't get to see a great deal of Elisabeth's 7 days here. She collects her belongings from her old job, she refills the food bags of the substance, and then we're back as the young and hot Sue. She's walking around this apartment, which we'll get into the symbolism of that later on, but she's just walking around in her underwear, drinking a Diet Coke, looking like an advert from the 90s. She sees that the TV's been left on the shopping channel and there is an indent of Elisabeth's butt in the couch. She gives this absolutely disgusted look, like how pathetic. All she did with her 7 days was bum around at home and watch the shopping channel. This is where the trouble begins. She knocks through a wall in the bathroom to make a room to keep the dormant body in. Like she wants to hide her away. It's the start of that feeling creeping in. Through her making the noise, this neighbor is angrily banging on the door because he thinks it's Elisabeth inside, and he is very ready to shout at her when the door opens. When the hot young Sue opens the door, his demeanor entirely changes. Now he's nice. Now he's complimentary, saying, "Oh, it's just so awesome when things are going on in the building, and I'm handy if you ever need help. I've got a big hammer." A prime example of how a young woman with a pretty privilege can be treated over an older woman who is seen as no longer having a use. Demi Moore has said that this movie is about delving into the collective consciousness of women's value diminishing as they age. Sue's life continues. She has her own show and walks down the now empty hallway where before there were Elisabeth's pictures through the ages. There is now only one of Sue, signifying her new start, her young new life, and her first milestone, as well as the erasure of Elisabeth. This hallway in particular is a very important symbol of something which I'll explain in the next section. Sue is then meant to switch. Her 7 days are up, but she goes out to a party, meets a guy, and brings him back to the apartment. Whilst they're getting it on, her nose starts to bleed and she stumbles into the back room. Her time is up and she's supposed to switch, but instead she syringes more juice out of the back of Elisabeth's spine to stabilize herself with, and gets an extra night of overtime to spend with the guy. For the first time, the rules have been broken and there are consequences. When Elisabeth comes around for her 7 days, she finds that one of her fingers is now old and wizened, greyed out and gross on her hand like the curling finger of a monkey's paw. She calls the number of the substance to complain and is told what is done cannot be undone. She says that she isn't respecting the balance, but the voice reminds her, "You are one, there is no you and her," and hangs up. Elisabeth bumps into the young man that Sue was with last night as he collects his motorbike, and he's very hostile and rude to her. Again, an example of how when a woman is deemed to be of no value or use to a man, he treats them completely differently. Elisabeth heads inside and immediately finds Fred's number. As she looks at it, we get a literal pop-out bubble of him and his voice saying, "You're still the most beautiful girl in the whole wide world," and she smiles to herself. She calls him to organize a date. She clearly just wants someone to love her for who she is, as herself. They organize a date for tonight, and Elisabeth seems happy for the first time since the intro. We then get one of the most profound and powerful and probably relatable scenes in the entire movie. It's Elisabeth trying to get ready for her date, and she's looking at herself in the mirror, doing her makeup, and as she gets ready to leave, she closes the door on Sue's dormant body, and she looks upon her. She sees kind of how young she is, laying there in the darkness, and her mood entirely changes. Immediately comparing herself to her, she goes back to the mirror and looks at herself again. She applies even more makeup, and then again tries to leave the house. She gets to her car keys, and out of the window she sees the billboard of Sue, where once there was a billboard of Elisabeth. She is again comparing herself, and it represents the comparison that all women face all the time with advertising. They are bombarded with it constantly in their day-to-day life. She goes back to the mirror again and tries to pull the dress together to cover up her cleavage. She was looking amazing before, but now she is ashamed of her body in comparison, grabbing a shawl which she wraps around her neck and down her front. She applies more and more makeup and goes to leave the house again. She pauses at the door and just can't quite bring herself to leave, catching her reflection in the doorknob, and again goes back to the mirror. But this time she just starts to lose it. She's smearing the lipstick over her face, grabbing at herself, pulling and gouging at her face, and she just never goes on the date. We see her sat sadly on her bed while her phone pings with texts over and over again as Fred asks if she's late, if she's okay, and if she's on the way. This is a powerful and relatable scene which directly links to the ending. What I will say on it for now is I feel like if Elisabeth had had the courage to go on that date, he would have just wowed and cooed over her and told her how pretty she looked, and maybe things would have been different. But she just couldn't leave the house. The comparisons in her own mind paralyzed her, made her disgusted with herself, and like she didn't deserve to go out. Of course, this is going to be something that I can't ever fully speak on or understand as a man, but I can try to understand it and empathize with it. And there are some ways that men will experience this, primarily with our bodies and those comparisons, but it's nothing compared to what women experience in the world at large. It's ever present and forced upon them. And the movie does such a good job of hammering that home. It really, really excels at that. There's not even a sniff of you judging Elisabeth for feeling this way. You completely understand where she's coming from. So she doesn't go on her date, and she hits the fridge instead, and she binge eats, which leads to a nightmare scene of Sue doing her TV show and food bulging out of her as she pulls a chicken drumstick out of herself. I think this shows just how connected the two are, because it's never really clear when they're switching, is this Elisabeth's consciousness in this new body, or is she literally just asleep whilst this is going on? But I think they are two separate entities, but this shows that they are still connected, as the voice keeps reminding them they are still one. Elisabeth's binge eating leads to Sue's nightmare about food inside her. Sue's star continues to rise. She's getting more and more famous, more and more loved, and she'll be hosting this big New Year's event. She decides that she wants more time. Continuing to live her life, she sucks more juice from Elisabeth's spine to satiate her need for this overtime. The rules have been broken yet again, and this time Lizzie finds herself with a withered and shriveled leg and foot. Her entire hand and forearm are the same, and her hair is greyed. The voice on her phone reminds her, "You are the Matrix. You can decide if you want to stop. It can go back to being you on your own if you want to end the experience. Would you like to stop?" She looks at the billboard of Sue across the street, and she says, "I can't stop." I feel like in some ways this is symbolic of the ability to stop the experience, to stop comparing yourself to others and to attempt to break free from the matrix of the modern world that is constantly telling you what is beauty. The advertising billboard across the street of the hot young girl that makes you feel worthless. Do you want to stop the experience? Do you want to stop scrolling Instagram? You can stop at any time and break free of it, but she literally can't. She sits back in front of the TV again unhappily. They switch, and Sue finds the place disgusting and covered in food, and now she no longer wants to switch back. She's kicking at Elisabeth's dormant body and calling her names, and keeps draining her spine of fluid to keep living her own life. She does this until all of the food is gone and nothing more is coming out of the spine. She has nothing to stabilize herself with. She has no option but to switch back. And when she does, the third time this rule has been broken and for a prolonged period, Elisabeth is now a kind of monstrous hag. She's completely drained of life, bald with a hunched back, sagging skin. She looks about 300 years old. Sue has sucked the life out of her. This is the last straw for Elisabeth, and she finally requests the termination kit. It's a syringe with black fluid in, and she starts to pump it into Sue's heart. After she's done so, she has a change of heart and tries to wake her up, saying that she needs her and she can't do this. It's our big night, you've got to come back. She starts to perform CPR, but that doesn't work, so she attempts to switch again, hooking herself up to Sue, who then wakes up. For the first time, they are both awake at the same time, and Sue spots the termination kit, and before Elisabeth can explain, she attacks her. Sue pretty much assumes, rightfully so, that she was trying to eliminate her, so now she wants to take out Elisabeth. She holds her up to a mirror and smashes her face into it over and over again as they look at themselves. She beats Elisabeth until she is just covered in claret and Elisabeth is no more, and when that happens, Sue does this weird little lurch forward and the screen says, "Remember you are one." For me, I think that moment showed that when she dispatched of Elisabeth's body like that, her soul, or whatever her essence was that was separated from her, went back into the body that is Sue. It's time for the New Year's party, but when Sue is getting ready for it, her teeth start to fall out. Her nails are coming off, her ear falls off, and she runs home and tries to use the substance again. This is a massive rule break. It says only use it once, so now Sue has injected herself with the same thing that Elisabeth did at the beginning of the film. So what happens when a copy tries to make a copy? We see the cells splitting over and over again, multiple eyes in one socket this time, and we see a burning heart that looks deformed. It made me think of cancer because when the cells are replicating over and over in the ways that they're not supposed to, that is how tumors are created, and this is what she did to herself. She turned herself into a massive tumor, one which has Elisabeth's face growing out of its shoulder blade. It is quite hideous to look at. She is known as Monstro Eliza Sue. She is both of them together, and without wanting to sound rude about it, she's absolutely hideous. She looks at herself in the mirror and stumbles back to the New Year's show, putting earrings on and trying to make herself look pretty, using straighteners on her one tangly strand of hair. She then creates a mask of Elisabeth's face from a poster and sticks it to her face and applies lipstick to it. She stumbles onto the stage and everyone is horrified by her. The mask falls off of her face and they are absolutely disgusted and scream at her, calling her a freak. I think there is a reference here to King Kong, kind of the imagery of a monster in the theatre and the reaction of the public to it. Don't forget that Harvey called out Elisabeth's past as winning an Oscar for being in King Kong. And then, in one of the most disgusting things I've seen on film in a really long time, Monstro seems to either puke or birth a boobie out of the side of her head, and it just flops out onto the floor and the crowd absolutely lose it. They attack her over and over again, they push her, and she falls onto her back on the floor with a spotlight looking down on her as she says, it's me, symbolic of both the spotlight of stardom and it feels almost like a medical examination light as well. This random crowd member hits her as she gets back up and her head is gone. She explodes as it grows back out, spewing blood all over the crowd in one of the most graphic scenes of the year. She runs out down the orange hallway and explodes into a mess on the floor. And the final scene is Elisabeth's disembodied face crawling out of that mess of goo and crawls onto the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame that is hers. The spotlight is on her again. She remembers the applause, how she was loved, when she was told that she was irreplaceable, and she fades away into just mushy goo. She is then mopped up by a street sweeper going over the top of it, and the movie ends. The Hollywood Walk of Fame serving as this bookend from first shot to last as we've seen the rise and the fall of Elisabeth. So, what is this movie about? As if you didn't already pick up on it, but let's go into the behind the scenes of this movie, the meaning of the substance, and answer some of the questions that people have come away from the movie with from the writer and director herself. What is the movie really about? While this film is definitely not subtle and you can absolutely pick up on its themes and what it's trying to say, let's get the words directly from the writer and director Coralie Farge. She said, "Since I was a kid, I thought about how I had to live with my own image, and I learned to be super violent about it. It made me feel like I was never good enough. At each age, you have a reason that you can find that you are not enough. Past my 40s and aiming to my 50s, it became even more violent. I felt I'm going to be erased. This is the end of it. It was so absurd, but so real. I had to do something with it. It's time to say enough. I wanted to let this violence go out and make a change." And this movie is a deep expression of that violence. It's executed perfectly in the form of a feminist body horror movie. It's very important to note that the writing in the movie never judges Elisabeth for chasing this dream. It is relatable and it is completely expected. I've seen a couple of videos explaining this movie away as being about Hollywood and actresses and being replaced by younger ones, but I think they've missed the point. It is definitely not a movie about a single actress who is desperate to become young again. It is a movie that is about a woman who is aging and trying to come to terms with that. Elisabeth is not a villain. Sue is not a villain. They are just two representations of a woman at different times in her life and the pressures that they both experience and how the world reacts to them. Probably the closest thing you get to a villain in this movie is Harvey and everything that he represents, or the young man that gives her the substance in the first place. Why are they called Sue and Elisabeth? The director said, "To me, the name Sue embodies a Marilyn Monroe vibe, like an old Lolita baby doll. It evokes the past. And that Elisabeth evokes the kind of classic Hollywood names of many old movie legends of an old Hollywood era." Did you know that the part of Harvey was originally played by Ray Liotta, but then the actor passed away, so Dennis Quaid was brought in to replace him. Production was already 3 months in, and he actually ate about 2 kilos of shrimp during that disgusting eating scene. What is the substance? The substance represents the current thing that women do to stay young, be fitter, be a better, more perfect version of themselves. Many have compared it to the current Ozempic craze, but the director who started writing this 5 years ago said Ozempic wasn't around then, but there will always be medical products to lose weight, suppress appetite. There is always a new incarnation of that. She said, "The fact that the movie has any resonance currently is great, but at the same time it tells me that unfortunately the issue is still very much around." With regards to what the substance actually is and who is behind it in the movie, we have to accept that it actually doesn't really matter. It's interchangeable with whatever current fad is being spread as the thing to do. It is a symbol. It doesn't matter who's behind it. It's not some secret experiment being run by a shadowy organization. It is just the way of the world. There is a lot of symbolism hidden in the sets of the movie. The orange corridor represents Elisabeth's life, starting at one point and ending at the other. It is also the final shot as Monstro exits the building before exploding on the sidewalk, reaching the end of her life. As I explained earlier, this is shown perfectly by the aging photos on the wall of Elisabeth as she walks through, and that later on it is erased and replaced with the first photo of Sue as she starts her new life. Elisabeth's apartment is designed to be timeless, old-fashioned, with futuristic qualities. They wanted it to represent every age and every kind of world. The fact that one side of the apartment is a full floor-to-ceiling window connects the inside with the outside. It lets Elisabeth gaze at her past when she is on the billboard, and then that is taken from her. When Sue is born and takes over the billboard, the view becomes the future. The very distinct white-tiled bathroom represents a cocoon. It's meant to feel like an experimental chamber, a mental space designed to feel abstract and almost empty. It is entirely intentional that there is no furniture in there. So what is the meaning of the monster at the end? And what is the meaning of that absolutely insane and gory ending? Coralie said, "The movie is fundamentally about the violence of control, how we're told to be delicate. In the past, women had to wear clothes that tightened everything up. I really wanted to let it out. I wanted to explore and shatter everything in a violent and uncompromising way. Because to shake this, we need an earthquake, a tsunami. We don't need to move this, we need to change the whole foundation of society." She went on to make a really interesting point, which I think a lot of people miss. That is, when Monstro looks in the mirror, it is the first time that any of the characters like what they see. Monstro feels like she deserves to go out in public. The audience screaming at her portrays society hating her for this, because how dare she not care what she looks like and still go out in public. and that when Monstro explodes so violently at the end of the movie, it's not portrayed as sad. It is in fact the only moment of relief that that character gets, and it's when she doesn't have a body. And that, sadly, says it all. The Substance is a powerful and gross movie with a lot to say. I personally am not a fan of body horror at all. And genuinely parts of this made me uncomfortable, but it not only felt like it worked for this movie, it felt necessary. The picture it paints resonated violently, and I think that this is an instant cult classic. This will be talked about by those who love it, and those who value its meaning for many years. The performances are incredible, Demi Moore is amazing, and I've said for a while that Margaret Qualley is a future star. It's definitely a movie where the director's choices are front and center, and Coralie Farge shines through. I absolutely need to see her other work after this. But what did you think of The Substance? Let everyone know in a comment below, and subscribe for more like this. I've been MadMorph, and this is my movie club where I do ending explains and full series recaps of the TV shows that I like. I also have a gaming channel and a podcast where I read audiobooks to help you sleep. It's free, and you can find all of those links in the info below this video. Until next time, good night.